Education was supposed to make us smarter. Instead, it gave us people who thought the sun revolved around Kansas and that spelling potato needs an extra E. 1. The Kansas Evolution Ban, 1922. Let's rewind to 1922, when Kansas decided Charles Darwin was a little too spicy for the classroom. The state banned the teaching of evolution entirely, because apparently the idea that humans weren't handcrafted like a fine piece of Tupperware was just too offensive. Teachers caught discussing natural selection could lose their jobs, and textbooks were scrubbed cleaner than a church potluck table. The irony? By banning evolution, Kansas accidentally proved it. The rule stayed in place for decades, mutating every few years into new, scientific alternatives like creation science and intelligent design. It's like someone took a biology class, learned nothing, and still graduated with honors in denial. Even today, Kansas occasionally revisits the debate, proving that survival of the fittest doesn't always apply to curriculum committees. 2. The dunce cap era of discipline, 1900s-1950s. Ah yes, the golden age of humiliation equals education. For half a century, schools used dunce caps to teach struggling kids a lesson. The logic was simple. If you're bad at math, public shaming should fix it. Teachers believed that forcing a child to sit in a corner wearing a cone labeled dunce would somehow unlock their inner Einstein. Spoiler, it didn't. It mostly created adults with an aversion to triangles. The practice finally faded out when psychologists discovered that embarrassment doesn't improve learning. It just makes therapy bills skyrocket decades later. Still, the dunce cap remains a perfect metaphor for the era's education philosophy. If you can't reach them intellectually, crush their self-esteem and call it progress. 3. The New Math Disaster, 1960s. In the 1960s, America panicked about the space race and decided the way to beat the Soviets was by confusing every student with something called new math. Instead of learning how to actually do math, kids were forced to think abstractly about what numbers mean. Teachers were told to explain things like base 8 counting systems to 10-year-olds who were still eating glue. Parents were furious, teachers were bewildered, and students were left wondering why they needed to understand set theory to buy a burger. The whole system collapsed faster than a Jenga tower in a wind tunnel, leaving a generation permanently traumatized by the words carrying the one. It was supposed to make kids better problem solvers. Instead, it made them terrified of fractions and probably responsible for half the nation's accountants choosing therapy over retirement. 4. The Metric System Rebellion, 1970s-1980s. Once upon a time, the U.S. government decided Americans should finally switch to the metric system. Like every other civilized country, the plan was simple: update road signs, teach kids in schools, and stop pretending feet and furlongs make sense. But then, the people revolted. Teachers got hate mail, parents complained about foreign numbers, and one congressman declared the metric system was a communist plot to confuse our youth. So, America quit halfway through, leaving generations fluent in exactly 0 systems. Schools started teaching both, which meant kids learned that a meter is roughly a yard and promptly forgot both by adulthood. The result? An entire nation that can send a rover to Mars but still can't tell you how many liters are in a gallon without Googling it. The real cherry on top? In 1999, NASA lost a $125 million Mars orbiter because one engineering team used metric and then another used imperial. The spacecraft literally crashed because of America's math stubbornness. If that's not poetic justice for refusing to learn centimeters, I don't know what is. 5. The silent lunch policy, modern era. Modern education may not use dunce caps anymore, but it's found new ways to crush souls, like silent lunch. In thousands of schools, kids who talk too much or disrupt learning are forced to eat in total silence. Imagine a cafeteria full of children chewing in eerie quiet like a post-apocalyptic buffet. Teachers say it's about discipline. Students say it's psychological warfare. And honestly, they're both right. Nothing teaches teamwork like staring at your sandwich while a teacher patrols the tables like a prison warden. Parents have tried to fight it, but administrators argue it's a valuable reflection time. Because nothing says healthy development like feeling punished for having a personality. These policies are the spiritual successor to the dunce cap, less pointy, more Orwellian. If lunch is supposed to be the one happy part of the school day, Silent lunch is proof that someone in charge looked at Joy and said, "Let's take that away." 6. The No Red Pen movement, 2000s present. In the early 2000s, schools decided red ink was too aggressive. The argument? Seeing a teacher's red corrections might hurt a student's feelings, so educators were instructed to use softer colors like purple or green, because apparently the problem wasn't the failing grade, it was the color it came in. Administrators called it positive reinforcement. Teachers called it nonsense with stationery. Red ink has been used for centuries because it stands out clearly. But thanks to a few fragile egos, the color became public enemy number one. Some schools even banned red pens entirely, as if they were weapons of emotional destruction. The irony is spectacular. We're preparing kids for the real world where your boss will gladly correct you, in bold red and probably all caps. Meanwhile, the students who survived the pastel pen era now think criticism is a personal attack. Education didn't just lose its color, it lost its backbone. 7. The No Zero Grading Policy, 2010s present. Because nothing says academic rigor like rewarding failure, some modern schools introduced the No Zero policy. The idea is that no student, no matter how little they try, should receive a grade lower than 50%. You can skip assignments, sleep through tests, and still get half credit just for existing. Administrators defended it as motivational, arguing that a true zero might discourage effort. Which is hilarious because giving points for not doing anything is the very definition of discouraging effort. Teachers hated it, parents were confused, and students quickly figured out the math. Literally, why try for 100 when you can coast on 50? In some districts, educators were even punished for giving zeros, leading to lawsuits, protests, and an entire generation discovering that accountability is optional. The result? Kids learned less about responsibility and more about how to game a system designed by adults terrified of being called mean. It's not education. It's grade inflation wrapped in participation ribbons and handed out with a smile that says, "We've given up." 8. The No Child Left Behind. Catastrophe, 2001-2015. In 2001, politicians decided to fix American education with a law called No Child Left Behind. It sounded noble until schools realized it basically meant teach the test or die trying. Funding became tied to standardized test scores, turning classrooms into Scantron sweatshops. Art, music, and creativity were sacrificed at the altar of multiple-choice mastery. Teachers stopped teaching subjects and started teaching strategies, like how to eliminate the obviously wrong answer faster. Schools that failed to hit targets were publicly shamed or shut down, as if embarrassment was a teaching method. The pressure got so bad, some administrators literally changed test answers to keep their jobs. The whole system was a bureaucratic panic attack disguised as reform. Instead of helping struggling students, it punished the ones who didn't fit the mold. No Child Left Behind may be the most ironic name in education history, because by the time it ended, almost everyone was. 9. The School is a Prison Architecture Trend, 2010s. Somewhere in the last decade, architects decided schools should look more like correctional facilities than places of learning. Gone were the colorful walls, open courtyards, and libraries full of life. In came gray concrete, metal detectors, and windowless hallways straight out of a dystopian film. Safety was the excuse, but let's be honest, it's hard to feel inspired to learn algebra when your classroom resembles a holding cell. Students joke about it online with hashtags like Nasri Inmate Class of 2026, but the humor hides a real problem. When school looks and feels like punishment, kids start treating it like one. The irony? Studies show that bright, open spaces increase focus and reduce anxiety. Instead, many districts doubled down on designs that scream order and control. We've basically reinvented the panopticon, only now it hands out report cards. It's the perfect metaphor for modern education. We don't teach kids how to think freely. We just teach them how to line up efficiently. 10. The cursive doesn't matter. Mistake, 2000s present. Once upon a time, cursive handwriting was a rite of passage. Now it's as extinct as dial-up internet. Around the 2000s, schools started phasing it out, arguing that nobody writes by hand anymore. The result? An entire generation that can't read old family letters, historic documents, or even their grandparents' birthday cards. Teachers were told to focus on digital literacy, which apparently meant knowing how to type angry emails at record speed. But the loss of cursive wasn't just aesthetic. It damaged memory, motor skills, and even reading comprehension. Studies later showed that writing in cursive activates parts of the brain linked to creativity and critical thinking. So, naturally, education boards ignored that and doubled down on tablets. Ironically, the Declaration of Independence, one of the most important texts in American history, is now unreadable to the same students supposedly being taught civic pride. They can Google freedom, but they can't read it. The pen might be mightier than the sword, but only if you can still hold one. 11. The self-esteem curriculum epidemic, 1980s-1990s. In the 1980s, a group of well-meaning psychologists convinced America that the key to better education was making kids feel smart, not necessarily be smart. Thus began the self-esteem curriculum. Schools replaced competition with compliments, grades with growth, and actual achievement with motivational posters featuring kittens dangling from tree branches. Teachers were told to avoid saying anything that might hurt a student's feelings, even if that thing was, "You're wrong." For a while, it seemed harmless, until those students entered the real world and discovered that reality does not, in fact, hand out stickers for effort. Employers weren't impressed by participation trophies, and college professors didn't care how inspired you felt about failing calculus. The entire movement was built on the delusion that confidence creates competence. Turns out, it's the other way around. Instead of raising a generation of achievers, we raised one of people who can give great PowerPoint presentations about their feelings. 12. The gifted program. Paradox, 1970s present. Every school had that one mysterious hallway, home of the gifted kids. They got special projects, smaller classes, and an aura of smug mystery, while everyone else was stuck memorizing state capitals. The idea was noble. Give bright students extra challenges. The problem? The criteria for being gifted was about as scientific as astrology. A single test taken at age 8 determined your academic destiny. Miss one question about fractions and congratulations, you're average forever. The gifted kids grew up under insane pressure, while everyone else learned to think they just weren't cut out for brilliance. Some schools even segregated the programs physically, creating a weird academic caste system. Years later, psychologists found that many so-called gifted students developed anxiety, perfectionism, or burnout, while plenty of regular kids went on to become wildly successful. Turns out, labeling 8-year-olds like prize cattle might not be the best foundation for lifelong learning. 13. The no recess revolution, 1990s-2000s. In the 1990s, someone in education decided playtime was a waste of time. Schools started slashing recess to make room for academic excellence. Kids as young as 6 were sitting through 6-hour days with barely 10 minutes to move, because apparently running around was unproductive. The result? Skyrocketing ADHD diagnoses, anxiety, and more classroom meltdowns than a Nickelodeon slime show. Teachers noticed kids couldn't focus, administrators noticed test scores weren't improving, and parents noticed their children were acting like caged raccoons. Recess wasn't just about fun, it was brain fuel, emotional regulation, and social learning. But the system ignored biology in favor of bureaucracy. Some schools even replaced recess with structured movement time, where kids did jumping jacks in silence under teacher supervision, because nothing screams joy like state-mandated cardio. In trying to make kids smarter, we accidentally made them miserable. And the worst part? They still had to learn geometry right after. 14. The square pizza and chocolate milk. Nutrition plan, 1980s-2000s. If you grew up in an American cafeteria, you already know this one: square pizza, canned corn, and a carton of chocolate milk. That was considered a balanced meal. Somewhere in the Department of Education, a group of adults looked at melted cheese, grease, and sugar and said, "Yes, this will fuel young minds." The logic was simple. If it fits on a tray, it's healthy. Schools treated pizza like a vegetable because, technically, tomato sauce existed somewhere under the oil slick. Add in dessert milk loaded with sugar, and you've got a generation who thought calcium came in Hershey's flavor. When the government finally tried to fix it, lobbyists stepped in to defend pizza's honor. Congress literally ruled that pizza still counted as a vegetable for school lunches. Nutritionists wept, kids cheered. America's cafeteria culture became a monument to our national inability to take health seriously. And somewhere out there, a grown adult still thinks 2 slices of pepperoni and a brownie are a good start to the day. 15. The attendance above all policy, 2000s present. In a bizarre twist of logic, schools started valuing perfect attendance more than actual learning. Students were celebrated for never missing a day, even if they showed up coughing, feverish, or half-conscious. The message was clear. Spreading the flu is fine as long as your butt's in a seat. Some districts even handed out medals for attendance, tiny trophies for ignoring medical advice. Meanwhile, sick kids dragged themselves to class like extras from a zombie movie just to keep their records clean. Teachers got sick, parents complained, and administrators insisted it built discipline. In reality, it built germs, resentment, and the occasional epidemic. During the pandemic era, the hypocrisy became laughable. Suddenly, staying home was patriotic. The attendance obsession exposed what education really values: numbers, not well-being. Because in the great ledger of modern schooling, a child hacking up a lung is still counted as present and learning. 16. The Common Core confusion, 2010s. When Common Core launched, it was supposed to revolutionize American education with critical thinking. Instead, it turned math homework into a national crisis hotline. Parents stared at problems that looked more like abstract art than arithmetic. Kids cried. Teachers cried harder. The idea was noble: get students to understand why math works, not just how. But in practice, it was chaos. Suddenly, solving 2 plus 2 required 3 diagrams, a written paragraph, and an existential crisis. Teachers had to attend training sessions just to explain subtraction. One viral homework sheet even asked students to prove that 9 plus 6 equals 15, like math suddenly needed a legal defense. The reform ended up widening the gap between generations. Parents who grew up on simple long division couldn't help their kids without a decoder ring. Common Core didn't make America smarter. It just made dinner table arguments longer and homework nights sound like hostage negotiations. 17. The homework as punishment era, 20th century now. Homework was originally invented as a learning tool, but somewhere along the way, it became the go-to punishment for everything from talking too much to breathing too loudly. Forgot your pencil? Extra worksheet? Chewed gum? Write a 500-word essay on respect. Teachers, under pressure to enforce discipline, weaponized the very thing students already hated. It turned learning into labor and curiosity into exhaustion. Studies have shown that excessive homework doesn't improve test scores. It just kills free time and family life. But schools kept doubling down, sending kids home with hours of busy work designed to prove they were serious about learning. Ironically, adults now brag about how much homework they survived, as if chronic sleep deprivation in middle school were a badge of honor. If the goal was to make education feel like a chore, mission accomplished. We didn't create scholars. We created caffeine-dependent night owls with trust issues about the phrase, "It's just one page." 18. The calculator ban. Hypocrisy, 1970s-2000s. For decades, teachers treated calculators like contraband, evil little machines sent to destroy human intelligence. You'd think Texas Instruments was manufacturing brain-erasing devices instead of math tools. Schools claimed that real students should learn to do long division by hand, even as every adult on Earth carried a calculator in their briefcase, cash register, or pocket. The fear was that kids would forget how to think. Ironically, those same schools let teachers grade assignments on computers and track grades using, wait for it, calculators. By the 1990s, some districts finally gave in, but only for approved use, which meant everyone spent more time learning how to ask permission to use technology than actually using it. The ultimate twist? By 2020, standardized tests required calculators. So, after decades of banning them, schools made them mandatory. It's the perfect metaphor for education's favorite subject, hypocrisy 101. 19. The gendered classroom experiment, 2000s-2010s. In the early 2000s, some districts decided to separate boys and girls into different classrooms, claiming it would improve focus. Boys apparently were too distracted by girls, and girls were too intimidated by boys. The theory? Teaching them apart would unlock their potential. The result? Chaos with a side of lawsuits. Teachers were told to use gender-specific methods, more physical activity for boys, more gentle discussion for girls. It was basically the 1950s with PowerPoint. Studies quickly revealed what anyone with common sense already knew. Learning styles don't come pre-packaged with chromosomes. The experiment was quietly abandoned after parents and psychologists called it what it was: pseudoscience wrapped in nostalgia. But for a few glorious years, America tried to fix education with gender stereotypes and pastel-colored lesson plans. The only thing it truly taught was how fast bad ideas can graduate from theory to policy. 20. The open classroom fiasco, 1970s. The 1970s, a time when schools thought walls were oppressive, literally. The open classroom movement swept the country, preaching that removing walls would remove barriers to creativity. Schools knocked down partitions, creating vast, echoing spaces where multiple teachers taught different subjects at once. The theory was that kids would self-direct their learning, floating freely between lessons like academic butterflies. In reality, it was a noise apocalypse. Math bled into English, English bled into gym, and teachers developed the hearing loss of rock drummers. Students couldn't focus on anything except the fact that someone next to them was dissecting a frog while they tried to read Charlotte's Web. Within a decade, most schools rebuilt their walls in shame, pretending the whole thing never happened. But for a brief, glorious era, American education learned that while tearing down walls sounds inspirational, it's a terrible idea when you're trying to teach algebra next to a kazoo recital. 21. The sit still and learn delusion, 1900s present. For over a century, schools have believed the secret to knowledge is stillness. Sit up straight, feet flat, no fidgeting. The logic? Motion equals distraction. The result? An entire generation trained to associate learning with mild physical paralysis. Ironically, psychologists have known for decades that movement helps memory, focus, and creativity. But the education system doubled down on the idea that obedience looks like silence. Teachers scolded wiggly kids, parents got notes home, and restless students were labeled problems. Eventually, doctors joined in and handed out ADHD diagnoses like hall passes. The truth is, kids were never broken. The system was. The human brain evolved to learn by doing, not by sitting motionless under fluorescent lights for 7 hours. Yet every year, new rules arrive banning standing desks, fidget tools, or even stretching in class. The lesson? We've mistaken discipline for education. Instead of teaching kids how to think, we're teaching them how to endure chairs. 22. The zero-tolerance overreaction, 1990s-2010s. The 90s brought us neon windbreakers, dial-up internet, and one of education's worst ideas: zero tolerance. After a rise in school violence, districts decided the best solution was to punish everything equally. Bring a toy gun to school? Expulsion. Accidentally pack a butter knife in your lunchbox? Expulsion. Draw a stick figure with a sword? You guessed it. Expulsion. Principals became prosecutors, and kids learned that context didn't matter. Intent was irrelevant. The policy was supposed to make schools safer. Instead, it made headlines for destroying common sense. One 8-year-old was suspended for chewing a Pop-Tart into the shape of a gun. Another was arrested for carrying nail clippers. Teachers hated it, parents raged, and administrators hid behind policy. The irony? The system that claimed to teach responsibility removed every trace of human judgment. It wasn't zero tolerance, it was zero thinking. 23. The standardized testing addiction, 1950s present. Nothing defines modern education like the almighty standardized test. What started as a tool to measure learning turned into a billion-dollar industry of bubbles, pencils, and panic. Students memorize answers instead of understanding ideas. Teachers stop teaching subjects and start teaching strategies. Entire schools rise or fall based on test results, as if filling circles on paper is a reflection of human potential. Parents stress, kids cry, and administrators hold pep rallies for exams, as though number 2 pencils were Olympic torches. The worst part? The tests don't even measure what they claim to. Studies show they predict income and zip code better than intelligence or effort. It's a system where creativity is punished, curiosity is irrelevant, and test prep companies are the only ones winning. Education became less about growing minds and more about scoring points on a nationwide anxiety leaderboard. Education was meant to open minds. Instead, we standardized them. Which dumb idea deserves detention? You tell me.